Alright, so I don't really want to be like the millionth guy to talk about how patch 3.0 of Honkai Star Rail was kinda mid or even potentially kinda bad or whatever, but I am gonna be that guy right now because I think it's important to talk about this type of stuff so that Hoyoverse knows that we weren't satisfied and they can do better in the future. Let's go ahead and talk about this. Now, one of the main reasons I don't want to have to be one of the guys talking about this is because, well, it shouldn't have to be like this, right? Emphorius is 3.0, right? It's a new world, bro. New story, a breath of fresh air. It's Greek mythology themed, bro. Emphorius is Greek mythology themed. This should have been a slam dunk for Hoyoverse, but that is not what happened, and that's why we're here. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the things we didn't really like about this patch, some of the issues we had, and towards the end of the video, we'll go ahead and talk about some of the things we thought were just okay, or maybe even potentially good, or just mid about the patch, whatever you might want to call it. But let's first go ahead and take care of some of the low-hanging, easy fruit. If you're an English-speaking person, or even potentially a non-English-speaking person, you may have been playing with English voice lines. Only you kinda weren't, were you? Because, like, some of the most important characters in the entire patch did not have voice lines. Dan Hung in Bibbiter Lune is probably the biggest one. He should have had probably the most voice lines out of potentially anyone in the entire patch, and he had a big fat whopping 0 if you were playing on the English version of the game. Now, this all stems from the VAs on the English side of things going on strike. Not all of them went on strike, some of them are in a union and some of them are not. That's why you saw some voice lines, but you didn't get the other ones. And the ones that weren't voice lined were on strike because the company that Hoyoverse uses for the English voice lines, they were trying to use AI, artificial intelligence, to basically save some extra money and push out some of the characters that were already getting paid to do work in the game. The more AI that is used, or if any AI is used, that's less money that those voice actors are going to make because that's less lines they have to do, right? So no wonder why they went on strike. But as far as I know, that strike is over now. They came to an agreement, but it takes time to get all those voice lines for all those characters, and it also takes time for them to implement it into the game and even give all of those characters their mouth movements back. Did you notice a whole bunch of the characters in the patch, their mouths weren't moving? I imagine that some of this is normal. Hoyoverse doesn't always have the mouth moves in every single one of the cutscenes, even are voiced, but some of the characters like never had their mouth open the entire patch. And those, if you notice, were a lot of the ones that didn't have any voice lines. So I think they might, potentially, one day make the mouths move again, but again, I have no idea if that's going to happen. By 3.1, hopefully, fingers crossed, we will get the voice lines back because you're not going to get them in the middle of a patch. They don't do like hot fixes like that with, Hoyoverse games. They usually will do something when the main patch actually comes through. So even if they finish things up and they have all the voice lines ready during 3.0, we won't end up seeing them until 3.1. Again, fingers crossed we do get them, and they will backtrack and put all the voice lines back in previous patches that didn't have them. So that is going to get fixed eventually, but it is something that just adds to the giant pile of issues we have with 3.0. Now let's talk about the story, specifically the cutscenes. I heard from some people in my Discord that a lot of players were saying that it takes them roughly 10 hours to be able to complete the main story for 3.0. That might just be a rough estimate or guesstimate, but that does track. A lot of the main story patches do tend to be kind of longer ones, but despite this, for 3.0, we only got like roughly 7 minutes of cutscenes. Here, check this out, okay? I was recommended some videos here on the YouTube, and I decided to go look them up to kind of show you what I'm talking about here. This is Noxus Gaming right here. This is the first one that I saw, so I'm kind of shouting this person out. I'll link this video in the description in case you wanted to go check this out and give their channel some love, so go ahead and do that. But you see here, roughly 7 minutes of actual cutscenes. That's crazy. And it's not just them. You might say, oh, they didn't put them all in there. Well, this person here, whatever the heck their name is, in the Japanese dub, which shouldn't have had voice line issues, their video is roughly 7 minutes too, and these are just the raw, plain cutscenes. Now you might look at some of the other folks on here, such as, where is it? Maybe this person right here. they have a 20-minute video, but I don't know if that's all the raw cutscenes. You see them running around, for example, over here in the video as it's playing. That shows me it's not the raw cutscenes entirely. Maybe they're talking about some of the dialogue sequences between characters. Regardless, no matter how you slice it, you're looking at 7 minutes to maybe 20 minutes worth of cutscenes for a roughly 10-hour story. That is just not gonna work, because unfortunately, the 3.0 story seems like it's mostly just world building and setup. It doesn't really have a lot of soul to it. It doesn't really kind of immerse us, really. It's a little bit mid. It's a little bit boring at times. There's some good moments, but like for the most part, it feels like it's dragging its feet. And when you have like 7 minutes of cutscenes in a 10-hour story and a story that's dragging its feet, that just does not feel good. Because one of the main reasons people are complaining about this patch is black screen with text over it. This is like, I don't know, the fail-safe for Hoyoverse these days. Whenever they don't know what to do, they just throw a black screen up with a bunch of text on it. There's moments, especially when we saw this on Penacony, remember, some of the most important story bits were given to us on text over a black screen, bro. It does not feel good, especially if we're not feeling very satisfied with the patch. It's fine every once in a while for some extra context, but they were relying on this too heavy. If any of you know how long of the patch was spent just on black screen, please let me know, because it's a ridiculous amount of time, I'm sure. Now, in all fairness, most of the Honkai Star Rail story has been told through these dialogue sequences that you're looking at right now, rather than cutscenes. But why don't we just get more of these cutscenes rather than black screen, you feel me? And these dialogue sequences that we're seeing right now, well, most of the time, or at least some of the time, it doesn't really bother us, because as long as the story is doing well enough, as long as we're entertained enough, it's fine. But when the story is dragging its feet, and it's not as entertaining, and it's not as fun, these dialogue sequences start to become less and less enjoyable. And many people have just been calling these dialogue sequences the Yap Fest of Hoyo. This is the stuff they lean on when they don't know what else to do, when they don't have enough money to give us cutscenes. But obviously, we know that's a bunch of BS, because it's a multi-billion-dollar company. They can afford to do the cutscenes. They just tell most of their story through these dialogue sequences. Again, most of the time it's fine, but if you don't even have voice lines on the English side of things, or if the story is dragging its feet and it's not as entertaining, it is just simply not enjoyable, and this doesn't cut it anymore. And this is a perfect segue into the puzzles in the main story. Again, Amphorius has a bunch of puzzles you don't have to do, like right away in the story. You go do them later, but there are some things you have to do in order to complete the story. You are story locked. You cannot continue until these puzzles are done. And some of these puzzles are brain dead easy. A literal child could do it. You could slip fall onto your keyboard and accidentally get through the puzzle, because some of these puzzles are so stupid that it's like, okay, are you ready to start the puzzle? And then the puzzle starts, you push one single button, and then the puzzle's over. That's not a puzzle. That's a waiting room to get to the next section. Okay, and then some of these and then there's no in between, right? Because it goes from super baby puzzles to immediately puzzles that like are sort of just annoying, right? They're not hard, right? I heard some people in my Discord complaining about the puzzles, and some of you might be saying, well, it's a skill issue, and that's fair. I mean, you're probably right, but to be honest, like, if you put too many puzzles in a row, back to back to back to back to back, and it's just kind of annoying when you already have a story that's dragging its feet and making it not too enjoyable with black screen, dumb dialogue, and then now you got these puzzles roadblocking you from completing the story, and you can't keep going until you finish the puzzles. All of a sudden, the puzzles aren't so fun anymore, are they? And so it kind of just goes into this theme of 3.0 just dragging its feet the entire time, all the way to the finish line. There's so many moments where there just didn't need to be a certain thing. Like some of those little teleporter things where you go, you walk up to it, you click it, you all you have to do is like swipe right like you're on Tinder or something like that, and then it sends you to the next area. Like sometimes this will happen in between a cutscene or a dialogue sequence. Bro, like why are we wasting time? Just after the dialogue sequence, just have us, like, animate us going to the next area. Like, we're never gonna push those buttons ever again. What was the point? I mean, to be honest with you, this Honkai Star Rail patch felt a lot like a Genshin patch rather than a Star Rail patch, because when Genshin does these type of things, we have issues with that too, right? There's good things about Genshin, but there's also things we don't like about Genshin. And all of those things, those practices that we didn't really enjoy from Genshin, that's a lot of the stuff we were seeing in this patch. Like my brother in Christ, Hoyoverse, if it didn't work there, it's probably not gonna work here, okay? Let it go. Now, this next point I want to get on, I feel like is very, very important. Some of you might not realize that it is, but it truly is something that matters in games like this. Honkai Star Rail patch 3.0 lacked immersion. Okay, you couldn't really get too immersed in the story like you could with like Penacony or Belobog or even the Xianzhou Lafu, which also kind of dragged its feet a bit. But remember Xianzhou Lafu, like those first 3 or 4 patches of actual main story, those were great. It's only the filler patches where they needed something to fill the patch and they just sent us back to the Xianzhou. They've been kind of whoring out the Xianzhou. It's not really the Xianzhou's fault, it's like the filler patches and stuff, right? Even the space station, we were immersed into all of that stuff. But with Emphorius being, despite the fact that it's a Greek mythology-based world, again, this should have been a slam dunk for Hoyoverse. This is a very cool looking area. Like, this has a lot of potential, but we just couldn't get immersed because there were so many, like, immersion breaking things, such as the black screens, such as the lack of cutscenes, such as the stupid bathhouse situation. Now, Memphorius is a Greek mythology-themed world, and in ancient Greece, non-mythical Greece, real Greece, there was a very, very big emphasis on bathhouses. It was a big part of the culture. So Emphorius yoinked this whole entire culture and adapted it to their own, and so Emphorius has a big emphasis on bathhouses. If you know anything about bathhouses, you're walking around in the nude. You're walking around completely naked, free with your fellow brethren. That's part of the culture. That's part of the tradition. That is an important part of the tradition, and it completely breaks immersion when you're walking around completely fully clothed in a freaking bath of water. Like, what are we doing here? This looks so stupid, right? This is a multi-billion-dollar company, okay? If you don't want to spend the time to have like a mini cutscene where we switch into a robe as we go into the bathhouse, that's fine. Just don't put it in the game. Why are there bathhouses in the game? It makes no sense. It's just completely immersion breaking. It's just stupid. To be honest with you, I think that it's in the game so that Coomers and Gooners can have some weird like fantasy thing with the characters or something like that. Something like, hey, Casters. Hey, Eglea, what's going on, girls? Hey, fancy seeing you here. Oh, look at that. We're in the nude. Oh, and it feels like some Gooner session that they're about to have in their mind. Like they couldn't make it to Rule 34 video that second, so they have to do some weird, like, naked bathhouse, like, I don't know, weird thing for all the Gooners for Honkai Star Rail. There may have even been some, like, dumb, like, one-liner explanation for, like, why this whole situation is occurring where we're not in the nude in the bathhouse or something like that, you know what I mean? Like, but I might have been so bored with the story that it may have completely slipped my mind or I completely didn't see it or something like that. It just goes to show how stupid the whole thing is. If it's this dumb and you need some one-liner to explain it because everyone knows it's silly, just don't have it in the game. Just give us some cool location that has the cool water effects and all the stuff you got going on without it having to be some dumb Gooner session, like, I don't know, like bathhouse fantasy. Now, you might be saying that I'm nitpicking right now, and that's fair, because I kinda am, right? But when everything else is already not going super duper great, it's just yet one more thing that is not maybe that big of a deal on its own, but we have to add it to the giant pile of things that we don't like from this patch. The giant pile of overwhelming mid, right? It's the little things that add up, right? And in this case, it added up to a giant steaming pile of mid. Now, again, I don't want to just badmouth the patch. I do want to be fair. So I do want to go over some parts where I felt like things were like either not so bad, or like maybe things were even like mid, or even potentially good, or had a lot of potential. So let's go over a couple of those things. Now, this next part I don't think is spoilers. I am trying to be spoiler-free here, but just in case you've been warned, okay? Roughly halfway through the story, we end up meeting Mem, and then we end up getting the Remembrance path. And this just happens out of nowhere, and it's just like dumped right in front of our face like splooge, like you got bukkakied right in the face by Mem and the Remembrance Path and all this like random stuff. And don't get me wrong, this part actually felt like better than the rest of the patch up to that point. Like at the midway point, I was like, oh, is this finally starting to kick up a little bit here? But it just happens out of nowhere. And the main character even has a line that says something to the effect of, wow, we just get a new path? Just like that? I hope that I have that somewhere in my footage. I'll try to find it. If not, you'll just have to take my word for it. Even the script writer was self-aware enough to realize how out of place and lazily rushed the whole thing was. Compare this to Penacony, right? Bro, we had to solve the mystery of the Watchmaker in order to get the Harmony path. This took several patches, there was a lot of build-up, and it was super duper omega hype. That was significantly more enjoyable than just some, like, randomly having the Remembrance path just dropped in our lap like that. But that's how poorly written the rest of the patch is. Something with a significant flaw in it felt somehow good because the rest of the story was so bad, we were sort of like desensitized into liking parts of the story that did have their own flaws as well. And again, that's a bit of a nitpick, but I think you see my point. Now, again, I do have an overall positive sentiment with that part of the story, despite some of the issues I do have with it. I do especially like Mem, for example. I think Mem is great. I think Mem is cool. I think Mem is cute, funny, whatever. Like, the only issue I have with Mem is that Mem is supposed to be like this, like, all-knowledgeable, like, powerful deity or some random stuff. Again, I'm not trying to do spoilers here, so be careful in the comments, but, like, Mem's actually just a brain-dead Pokemon that doesn't even know how to say anything other than their own goddamn name, dude. Like, they actually... It almost reminds me of, like, Robin, right? Like, Robin, like, in combat, like, kind of gets old after a while. You sort of start to want to mute the music of the game and put on your own music in the background because you're tired of hearing Robin sing that same silly song over and over and over again. I think with Mem going, me, Mem, me, Mem, me, like that's cute at the start. Trust me, in like a few months that's gonna start getting real old real quick, okay? Anyways, for right now, I think Mem is cool. You fight me over it, all right? But I do want to talk about another part of the story that I actually do I think was pretty good. Like, the ending of patch 3.0 was pretty all right. Like, I thought that was, like, definitely more hype than a lot of the other stuff going on. And other people share the same sentiment. A lot of people have said the ending is pretty good. Again, we're trying to be spoiler-free, so I'm being vague here, but... it's kind of like when you watch an anime or a movie, right? And it has a bit of a slow start, and you're not really too sure how to feel. There's a moment or two in the middle where you're like, oh, that was all right. But by the time you get to the end, you're like, okay, the ending was pretty good. But bro, that doesn't feel very good when you have to drag your own sorry butt all the way to the end just to find out that it was all right. That doesn't mean the whole anime was good or the whole movie was good. It just means that it had some good moments. That's it, really, right? And some people aren't gonna even give it the time of day. If Honkai Star Rail started like this, like if Emphorius was the first world we got, a lot of us would probably quit the game. That is just facts, okay? That is just facts. But that is not the case, right? We have something called sunk cost fallacy. I'm sure you've heard a lot of other people talk about this because it's very common in especially the gacha gaming sphere, or what I should correct myself and say is the live service sphere, okay? Live service games, gacha games, Hoyoverse games, Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, you know, even Wuthering Waves to some extent will suffer from this to at least some varying degree, right? Because a lot of us have invested a lot of time, and many of us have invested a lot of money into a game like this, and we don't want to necessarily have our investments go to waste, right? I'm going to use a different example of a different game. World of Warcraft has had this problem for a very long time. I'm specifically talking about retail WoW, okay? The story, like the main story arc, started off really good, but it's sort of progressively gotten worse and worse and worse over time. Like, even diehard fans will say that, but when they're asked about why they still play the game, they'll say, with a response that is basically the same thing we see in gacha games, which is that I don't want to see all my mounts go away. I spent all this time in the game. This is my life, bro. I've spent so much in this. I've invested so much in this. I just don't want to let it go. And so they keep playing despite the fact that they don't even know if they like the game anymore. And we see this stuff in games like Genshin Impact or just gacha games in general. And this is going to occur in Honkai Star Rail as well. This is just a thing, right? That's why we're going to keep playing the patch, right? Even if patch 3.1 and 3.2 aren't all that great. I have a feeling most of y'all are still going to play the game because you want to see if it gets better or something like that because of how much you've already invested, right? If you hadn't invested all that time and effort and potentially money, you wouldn't feel that way. And if it was just bad, you'd just leave, right? Now, I do feel like Amphorius is going to get better. I think that this is just a classic case of too much setup in the early game and hoping that we'll stick around to see how they cook, right? But right now, they're burning the kitchen, and we want to take the spatula out of their hand and turn the heat down a little bit for them, but we have to let them cook to see what they bring up. Hopefully, they can turn this thing around. I think they will, at least to some extent. But again, we need to hold these guys accountable so that even if Amphorius doesn't turn out to be one of the best worlds in the game, in the future, they can try to do better. If we don't talk about this, they'll never change, okay? The same thing happened in Genshin for a while. It took a while before they finally started changing Genshin, and it only finally changed when we spoke up about it. So that's what we're doing this for right now. Anyways, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that I didn't include into this video, and if there's anything that you felt like I didn't put in or that you wanted to add to the discussion, please feel free to do so in the comments, whether it's stuff that's good about the patch or whether it's stuff that's bad about the patch. Anyways, if you guys like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.